we've been reading and witnessing incidents of violence that have sent Manipur into a situation of crisis. It's time that the national media gives special attention to the state and that the aspirations of its people are heard. We here at NewsX are making this effort in order to understand truly what the issues of Manipur are and then make an attempt perhaps to even solve them. Yesterday we focused on the land rights issue. Today we speak about illegal immigration, another decades-old issue that has been faced by Manipur. We all know that Manipur shares a 392-kilometer long border with a country that is now under the military coup and has also influence from China. Several incidents of illegal immigration and immigrants have been caught with arms and ammunition that have been reported in the past. The free movement regime that allowed visa-free travel between Manipur and Myanmar borders up to 16 kilometers now stands suspended. So what exactly is the immigration problem and what really needs to be done to solve it? We try to discuss it with our special panelists today. I have with me on the broadcast Dr. Kamkan Suwan, Professor and Head of Department for Political Science at the University of Hyderabad. We also have with us Professor Amar. He is former VC of Manipur University. Dr. Malim is also with us. He's an author. Let me begin this conversation with Professor Amar, if I can. Professor Amar, if you can just take a moment to explain to our viewers, sir, how long has this sort of free border existed between Myanmar and Manipur?
See, right now regarding border, let me recall what has happened during the last 2 days between the United States and the neighboring countries. The population, the people in the neighboring countries have been waiting for an opportunity to get into the US for jobs or whatever, and they have been waiting for lifting of this pandemic restriction. Second, let us look at the international norm of how to look at people moving across borders. There is something called international norm, how to treat the refugees, how to treat the immigrants who are trying to get into a country. Now, when it comes to Manipur, is there something like that established? Well, let me not talk about numbers because population numbers have now become something of like for calculating the relative strength to combat, relative strength to fight. Well, population is not used as a kind of resource for transformation and development. Population is now used as something to calculate the relative strength of each ethnic group to fight against the other. So I don't like to talk about numbers. But when it comes to movement of people, I will not like to use the term illegal immigration. Because do you really have something which is really established? This is the legal line where we have absolute control and we have the mechanism if somebody tries to enter, if somebody from Manipur goes to the other side. Because it is not a history of 50 years, 70, 100 years. It has been since time immemorial. The people on both sides have been more or less of similar ethnicity or very close ethnicity. They have been moving across.
Okay.
Now of course, Manipur has become part of India. Well, has India fully established this is the boundary and this cannot be touched upon? And have we thought of something like that? No, we don't have. But the people have relationship. I have my cousin the other side, and I'm on this side. I like to see my cousin. My cousin wants to see me. Well, when we don't have a system to define illegal movement, how can you say that any movement is illegal when there is ethnic closeness among the people moving on either side of the boundary?
Okay. So, Dr. Suwan, do you agree with this, the analysis made by Professor Amar when we talk about movement or immigration? I just want to understand from you, sir, if you can just help our viewers understand the historicity of this, of the movement and the porous border.
Yeah, thank you, Ria, for your time, and thank you for giving this opportunity to weigh in some of my considered opinion on a very contentious issue such as illegal immigrants. One of the things that we have to bear in mind is that the Indo-Myanmar borderland is a cultural area, right, in the geographical discourse, as it were. So you have movements of people both within as well as across territories, which are now known as India, Myanmar, Bangladesh, so and so forth. And this is precisely why the idea of migration as well as so-called immigration become deeply problematic, because these are contiguous cultural areas where ethnicities which have overlapping habitation across the borders move back as well as forth. And you would see this happening not only specific to the Kuki-Chin or Zomi communities, but also even within as well as across Meitei communities, who are otherwise known as Kathe communities in Myanmar. That's one that has to be noted. The second thing is that how do you then define who are illegal become deeply problematic, because first, as Professor Amar Yumnam has pointed out, we simply do not have authoritative data. Despite the Trump upcharge that the southern tip of Manipur has been susceptible to these cross-border crossings over time, the government simply do not have authoritative source or data on which they can pinpoint how many so-called illegal immigrants float over time. And the very fact that there is a nebulous, a very inclusive data about this is very useful by some of these conversion specialists, in the words of Paul Brass, that they can trump up this as a political trump card to kind of generalize a particular community and target them as illegal or illegal immigrants or foreigners. That is precisely why one of the important backdrop to these communal flare-ups that we see since 3rd May is also the lack of capacity as well as ability of the state to come up with this authoritative data which pinpoint how many so-called illegal immigrants float across the border. And this incapability also saw the sheer lack of legitimacy as well as credibility of the state government, that it used this conveniently to broad brush, use it as a broad brush to target specific communities, as it were, from the southern tip, which is very, very unfortunate, and which in effect is largely responsible for a deepening of suspicion as well as communal frenzy that is created in the valley areas.
Okay, so Dr. Suwan, what you're saying is that the movement of people across the borders has not had any real impact on the day-to-day lives of the people who are now ethnically Manipuri.
Certainly, this has never have any adverse implication, given that you see the kind of so-called complaint about illegal immigrants has never been established in the first place. And secondly, because you do not have any cleansing evidence to demonstrate that these so-called illegal immigrants who otherwise would have been detected by the state have established new village or settlement inside the territory of Manipur has never been obtained. It is useful for some of these conversion specialists in the valley areas to kind of paint a broad brush that the Kukis and the Zomis are illegal immigrants and therefore foreigners, which is totally unacceptable, and which also exposes the inability and capacity of the state, as it were, because the state does not have any authoritative data on how many movement have taken place over the years.
Okay, Dr. Malam, same question to you, sir. I'd firstly just like to understand your view on people who've been termed as illegal immigrants by the government itself. There was a government committee that made certain claims about illegal immigration and how some of them have been identified after the Myanmar war who've tried to enter India. What is your view on this aspect that has been raised by the government, where the state government believes that this sort of free movement has had a negative impact on the state of Manipur?
Let's keep aside the questions of illegal or legal for some times. Now, let's talk about the historicity of the boundary and the movement of peoples from the other side of the boundaries. We generally try to group now certain groups of tribes within the nomenclature of cookies. But it was totally a different pictures when British started recording all these accounts in the 1840s. By the time British have reached there in the 1840s, they started talking about the all cookies, a certain group of tribes, which are now organizationally connected to the Nagas. Waves of migrations took place at that point of time. There was raidings from across the border for various reasons, and British started transplanting so-called cookie settlement areas in certain pockets of Manipur. Boundary was clearly laid out in the historical time, and at that point of time, people exactly know which villages belongs to which tribe, then which tribal villages are the subject of Manipur, etc., etc. This went on for a long time. So boundary was very clear, and the difference between the Manipuri subjects and the non-Manipuri subjects was very clearly laid out. But after independence, as the previous speakers have pointed out, although the Manipur's boundary remained, international boundaries remains intact, there was no strict policy to regulate and check migrants coming from across the borders. And India doesn't have a proper refugee policies. Migrations from the Burmese side or from other sides keeps on coming in the 1950s, particularly after 1960s, and there were certain push and pull factors happening across the border that have, in fact, promoted migrations in different ways. So we have instances in 1960s, in the 1970s, and the 1980s, and even the recent phenomenon. Now, as our speakers have pointed out, we know the pressure of migrants in Manipur. It is not exclusively targeting the Burmese migrants having close ethnic affinity with the Kuki Sin Mizo groups. We're not talking about simply about the migrations from the Burmese side. We're talking about an increase in the populations in Manipur, which is causing lots of problems. Migrants could be from other parts of the country, or from Myanmar, or from Burma, or from Bangladesh. The tension in the Imphal Valley, particularly, and the initiatives taken up by the Meiteis is that a country or a state should have a mechanisms to regulate and check migrations. There has to be a policy to identify outsiders, call it migrants or whatever it is. You give whatever name that is different to you. But the latecomers, there has to be a policy to regulate entry and exit of outsiders. That's the whole issue reflected in the movement for inner line permit systems and later on for detections.
So Dr. Malim,
Yes, let me complete. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to identify who are the migrants until and unless the host tribes or the communities who have invited them and assimilated among them, unless they identify it. It's very difficult, as they pointed out. But bearing in mind that it's a common issue, I believe that the host communities should also sit together with other communities and fix a base here and find out a mechanisms to identify and detect outsiders and come up with a positive constructive policies. Otherwise, if migrations have to be encouraged merely for the sake of the number games, then it's going to create more problem in the future.
Okay, but Dr. Malim, what, just to educate our viewers as well, what is the current policy, sir, as far as free movement or the movement of migrants from Myanmar or any other part of the country is concerned?
We have two mechanisms. One is that the inner line permit system has been extended to Manipur. I don't know to what extent it will restrict free and unrestrained inflow and settlement of people from other parts of the country. But we already have the Foreigners Act 1960, which in fact applied effectively could have solved the question, the whole questions of cross-border migrations from other parts of the country. But recently, when the military junta began to carry out series of assaults in the peripheral areas, then large-scale migrations of people, particularly so-called refugees or whatever term we may give, take place, then Manipur government took up certain initiatives to organize refugee shelters home. That's where they are being placed. But we believe that there are a series of other migrants which have entered into Manipur unnoticed and have got settled down amidst our own people.
Right, absolutely. Let me bring in Dr. Swan as well. Dr. Swan, you've heard what Dr. Malan had to say. Would you agree that at least whether the free movement creates a problem or not, there is a need to come up with some sort of a system to at least know, okay, who has crossed the border to come into India?
See,
Yeah,
let me first question, is there any migrant? Right from, forget the British period, right from 1951 census, right from census after India independence, has there been any census? Let me question. And I'm putting this question as someone who has consistently surveyed the interior areas of Manipur. Has there been any census since 1951 which has been sincere, proper coverage, and authentic? Not even one. Not even one. So when we have that kind of situation, see, I have a brother. Well, we're assigning to one community and mentioning one community also, that is not something I rather enjoy. I don't enjoy that. Okay. Maybe I belong to a community when somebody define his cookie. Okay, fine. I have a brother. Okay. We are used to going to places and exploring the fertility of each area. We confine in that fertile area for some time, and since there are other areas which are uncultivated, we shift to that. Well, it happens that I am a layman. My brother is a layman. My brother doesn't know which line is Indian line, which line is Burmese line, and where I'm staying. So I just go. Nobody stops me. So my brother has been to a village for some years, and finding cultivation a little difficult, comes back to my original place nearby me. And will you call it? Will you call it immigration?
Right.
Will you call it immigration? So there are so many questions to be clear on our side. Before trying to put blames on any community, on any group, let us be very clear at a policy level. Let us be very, very sanctious about, let there be sanctity of policy, let there be sanctity of definition, let there be sanctity of implementation. Well, then we can say that this is what.
Okay.
When it comes to a village also, well, this is a cookie village. Okay, how many times in a year a particular government, a particular, or for that matter, how far the state has tried to link up with the people of that locality? I still remember, I'm talking about 50 years back. I'm going to be about 70. More than 50 years back, well, cookie with just, well, piece of cloth coming with a little piece of wood to be used somewhere, and they wanted salt. They wanted salt. So for salt, you had to travel nearly 3 days on foot. For salt. How, what sense have we brought to that? What sense have we brought to that? Well, in most of the villages, if you want salt, okay, salt is a little easier. A villager might bring 1 bag or so, that may be easier. But overall, to get access into anything.
Okay.
Well, is there anything, for example, my aunt child has fever, my aunt son has dysentery or things like that. Where is the point for my children to have access to the doctors? I'm talking of today. What has been said, What was in 1951 and what is there in 2023? Now you are talking of immigration, migration, illegal migration. Let us be very clear how do we settle our people. So let us be very clear on our policy level of settlement, definition, and defining people. Then we can identify. Then we can identify who is what. And now we don't have any kind of a picture on the basis of which we can identify the people. So what is happening is that it is almost like the government has been trying to escape from our failures.
Okay.
Let us admit the failures first, correct the failures, then we can start blaming the people. I don't want to blame any people. I would definitely blame the government for not doing anything which is sensible, which covers the people.
Okay.
And
Professor Amar, when you say failure of the government's policies, could you perhaps summarize it to the best of your ability? When you say policies, what policies are you referring to, sir?
Any policy, even social sector policy, education. Can you think of a world without proper access to education? Let's get into the interior villages. Let's get into interior villages. Let us look at this education scenario. Well, is there something called education? I'm not bothered. Well, somehow God has been kind enough for me and my children to have that proper access to education. But what I feel really is that today, even today in 2023, there are so many kids who should rather be in the school, but playing around and here, there, here. For me, the interpretation comes. Being a student of economics, my interpretation immediately comes. This child right now is playing well, very comfortably, but 15, 20 years back, he or she will realize that she is nowhere, he is nowhere. What happens then? What happens then?
Deepika, can I come in?
Okay, yes, Dr. Swan.
Yeah, I think, you see, it's one thing that has to be made clear is that the onus of responsibility, of course, is into the capacity of the state, which Professor Amar Yumnam has also alluded to. But more than that, it would be naive to squarely put the blame on the state. But there are also civil society on both sides of the divide, which equally, weave and construct narratives around the very contested idea of the changing political geography of what we call Manipur today. And that, in a sense, I think foreground the contestation at two layers of contestation that I could see. One is to see borders essentially as map physically, right? A map which is drawn out physically by demarcating territory as fixed hard boundaries. And the question that needs to be asked is that once you have a fixity or a kind of impermeability of borders, then you have in effect enclosed population which otherwise are not used to enclosure of their territories. And that is precisely why you see on citizenship discourse, there are quite extensive literature which point to the difference between formal citizenship and informal citizenship. Say, for example, in the Indo-Bangladesh border, Mohammad Sadiq, for example, talks about the extensive ways in which informal citizenship regime, in effect, navigate ways and means of penetrating into the bureaucratic corruption nexus, where it can easily circumvent, formal citizenship practices through what he calls, quote unquote, paper citizenship. So that's one part. The second part, which I think is also important, is to possibly interrogate with the very idea of looking at borders as map on the minds, right? So if the kind of map on the minds that people from the valley and the hill areas do not seem to meet, I think it's deeply problematic, because this is something that you cannot resolve formally, right? And this deeply embedded, subjective construction of what constitute, illegal or legal citizenship continue to be a very contested idea. And I think this is precisely where what Malem has pointed out earlier about the very idea of migration of population from southern boundary, taking a kind of a reference point to make Kulos drive to construct what he calls sepoy villages in the 1840s and the 1850s, where around 2,000 Khongsais, who are now, a sizable segment of the Kukis today, which is known in common political discourse, is also misplaced, because if you look at the Chaitharol Kumbaba, for example, the migration of population, not only of the Kukis, but also of the Métis, and for that matter, all communities in Manipur precede the idea of, sepoy villages, as it were. So in that sense, to kind of have a fixed geographical idea that the very idea of Manipur itself is once and all settled, say, in 1840s or 50s, without being mindful of and being historically sensitive to the continual border crossings that happened across time and space at that point of time, would possibly precipitate, the kind of contested narrative that we see unraveling today. I think it is therefore imperative that civil society organization and political leadership across the divide should be mindful of this historical specificity of the fluid nature of movement across what we now call as Northeast India, not just specific to Manipur. Until and unless we grapple with this and take it in our stride, the kind of political narratives would continue to be very confrontationist in nature, which might unleash, another spate of violence, which might be, unacceptable both in its intensity as well as scale.
Okay, but at the same time, Dr. Swan, there are some people, some sections of society who do allege that this free movement right, this free movement agreement of 16 kilometers has been misused over the years. Is that something that then, of course, needs to be rectified? And what would your suggestion be to the government? How does one rectify it?
I think it is impractical to rectify this free border movement, which is in place, as you know, since the 1960s, because somehow, as I said, in a cultural area like the Indo-Myanmar borderland, howsoever much hard boundary you fix, there are informal ways of crossing the borders. And I think in that sense, policymakers' nightmare continue to be that, not just in the Indo-Myanmar borderland, but in much part of South Africa or in Europe, you name it, right? So one of the feasible way of doing that would be, as Professor Amar has also pointed out, the capacity of the state should be enhanced in ways that comes up with credible citizenship data. And for that matter, the most contentious issue, therefore, is that if you fix a particular citizenship idea that got implicated in the contested nature of discourse on changed political geography over time, do you see essentially Indo-Myanmar as a physical geographical place? Or do you see it as, a mental maps, as it were? And that is precisely where the contestation seems to be unresolved and continue to be so.
Okay, I'm running out of time, but let me bring in Dr. Mallon back into the conversation. So you've heard what the other two panelists have had to say. What would your suggestions be towards, do you also feel that figuring out this issue of who's crossing into India and coming up with some sort of a solution to at least address the concerns that have been raised that this border policy has been misused, even some people say by insurgent groups. What's your suggestion? How do you think this can be best addressed?
No, if the border regions has to be dismantled, then within Manipur, the hill and divide border lines that's been created has also been dismantled and allowed the Métis or whosoever want to settle in the hills to buy a plane and settle.
Okay. All right. All right. I thank all of our panelists for joining us. We've had a very important conversation about an aspect of immigration and cross-border movement that has been raised over the past few days, and it's of course enlightened us as well, what the panelists have had to tell us. They believe that it's not really the biggest issue out there, but yes, perhaps some policy in today's day and age would help in making the entire movement a bit better, a bit smoother, and also keeping the government in loop in terms of how many people are coming in and exiting the country.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.